Hi, I'm Larry with Aspen Power Catamarans, and we're on a C120 here, and Amanda and I are going to do a walkthrough of that. She's a friend broker from Fort Lauderdale that's done some of these amazing tapes with us before, but she's just lots of boating experience, lots of good questions, and she's going to play our customer in this case and try to answer those things that are kind of cue me on things that didn't quite make sense that pop out of Larry's mouth at different times. But we're going to basically walk through this 40 as if Amanda's the new owner, which one day she might.
That's right.
And we'll kind of show you how everything works and how to take care of it, and you know, best use and practices on a C120 Aspen. Amanda, as we're going to walk forward up to the bow to kind of talk about the anchor and things like that, just the kind of something to know, the starboard deck trail is about 14 inches wide on an Aspen, and the port one is about 8 or 9 inches wide. And basically, when you're going to walk forward, you typically use the larger one. You still have one on the port side, but having one on the starboard side is pretty handy. Another thing we do that's kind of fun is the deck trail has a notch here, so that any water that comes down the deck trail actually runs off the side of the boat before it gets into the cockpit. And a lot of companies will just let the water run right into the cockpit. It seems foolish to me, so we put a little gutter to shoot it off the side. But as we go forward here, you'll see there's big handholds here and a nice rail and a step to get up. And you've also got a little toe kick here, so you know when you're getting near the edge. So good handholds all the way along. And I like to just start this conversation right up on the bow here.
Thanks.
And you know, you've got a great big 1.5-inch stainless rails. This is a Lumar 1000 Pro Series windlass. And we like the Lumar windlass for a couple of reasons. It's made in the United States. It's got an amazing reliability record, and if you ever did need anything, you can get the parts for it, which is kind of nice. And it's 1,000 pounds. Some guys will say, oh, you should have a bigger anchor. Well, if you're pulling 1,000 pounds of force, boy, that's a lot. And you know, it's enough to actually potentially damage the bow roller assembly even at 1,000 pounds. So what's the point of having 1,200 pounds or 1,500 pounds if you're never going to be able to use it anyway? And these are real reliable. I don't like windlasses that have the motor that's down below the deck, because they tend to, they basically sit in this real humid environment. When you reel your chain and anchor in, you end up with all this moisture in the anchor locker, and that tends to permeate the motor, and they don't last as long. We've been using these particular windlasses for about 10 years now, and we've never replaced one and never actually had to take even one apart. So to me, that's the kind of thing that I like. And for a user, essentially the only thing you're going to be able to do with it, there's a clutch here. It's a cone clutch, and as you tighten this down a little tighter, it creates more friction here, which gives it a little tougher pull. If you want more, usually your fingers can do it, but there's a wrench that comes with it that fits into this, and you can give it a push if you need. If you lose your wrench, the back end of a wood hammer, you can tap it too. I've had owners do that. Yeah. And what I like to do is have it set up so that here's a snubber, kind of a safety snubber. I tend to use a bungee cord myself, but this customer has it tied, which means each time you have to fiddle with it.
One way to prevent it from falling, though.
Yeah, they tend not to fall. You should have some kind of a safety device. What I like to do is have the clutch set so that when I pull on it in the middle here, and I pull pretty hard, I can barely move it.
I see.
I'd say that's just right.
Yep.
Okay. You know, because you're pulling in the middle here. You would never want to have the switches on where you might. This is a point where you could cut your fingers off.
Sure. Yeah.
So you don't want to do that. But and then there we go. And you can tell when it's pulling, it's pretty positive kind of connection there. And we'll slip that on too. I really think the cleat's enough. Don't think it needs to be tied as well. Other things about this, it's 5/16 chain, and we use 1.5 times the length of the boat in chain. So there's about 60 feet of chain and 200 feet of 1/2-inch line on this. These are your control buttons here. In is pulling it in, out is pushing it out. Is kind of how it works. This is the standard anchor that we do, a Fortress. I choose the Fortress, A, because it's got a tremendous ability to grab the bottom and hold, but it also isn't so heavy that if you ever did have a windlass failure or had something going on here where you needed to pull it up by hand, you could still pull it up by hand. Some of the guys will get such a heavy anchor that you know, A, it won't fit, and B, it's so heavy if it ever has a windlass problem, they won't be able to you know, get it up off the bottom. And the windlass, it might not be the windlass, but it might be that you ran your house batteries dead flat, and now your anchor's down and you're kind of stuck. So anyway, that's how that works. Down in here is our anchor locker. Let's open this up. Yeah, so if we kind of look in here, you can see the rope is all coiled up, and if I can
see it pretty good.
Yeah, down you can see how it's coiled and how the chain kind of stacks up there. You can also see that we put in a telltale every 30 feet,
that's great.
and they change colors as you go. This one says 180 feet there, and the windlass will automatically pale it in and out. And it just sort of goes in there wonderful and comes back out. Occasionally the transition between chain and anchor will bind, and you'll want to go, maybe you'll have to go in and out, just kind of try it one more time with that, and should be good. There's also, if you look down in the corner over here, there is a spigot there that's for being able to wash this all off. And when I get back from a trip, if I've been gone for a couple of weeks and use the anchor every day, when I get back and I'm washing the boat, I open the hatch and I spray out the gutter and I spray off everything in there with fresh water.
Yeah.
And then I'll take a towel and fold it over, lay it in the gutter, and leave this hatch just cracked so that it's can dry out in there.
That's a great idea.
You know, keeps the chain a lot nicer. You can see it's gasketed all the way around, and you know, really works pretty well. I think that's it. This compartment does have a big drain at the very back edge of it that goes overboard, and then there's a gutter all the way around too. This customer's got a spare hose in here, and this is a coil piece here, and you can take this, connect it to the spigot there, and as the anchor is reeling in, you can simply spray off the dirt. Okay, Amanda, there's a couple other things here that we can cover up on the front deck. So these are LED nav lights, and they're really tough. They're rated for over 2,000 hours. And the one thing that customers will do is sometimes, for some reason, they'll try to use the center cleat here, and they'll run a line across, and they'll get a line caught in here, and or they'll pull on this, and the cap is a stainless steel cap, and if you hook on it and yank it with a rope, you can actually pop the cap off. And the caps, they don't sell just the cap. You have to buy a whole set, and so you know, to get the stainless cap, you have to do that. The real question is, why did you use this cleat, which is really for the anchor, versus just using the cleat that's back on the corner there?
Sure.
But if you do hook up a line on that, it's a replaceable part, just a little set screw here that holds it on. But that's one little thing to kind of know. The other things here, there's a cushion here, and typically people will ask, well, what do I do with these outside cushions? Do I just leave them on all the time? And the answer is, yeah, you could leave them on out in the weather all the time, but you'll replace them about every 2 years if you do that. It's better to put them on when you're using the boat, and then when you're leaving for 2 weeks or something, then pull the cushions off. On these Bomar hatches, they're great big solid hatches. You can walk on them, you probably shouldn't. If they'll, because they're horizontal, sometimes get water spots on them. And there's a company called Meguiar's that makes an acrylic cleaner material. And it's just a little tube that you can get at West Marine, and you can clean that with Meguiar's if you want. You've got big pantograph wipers here, and just like your car, you're going to replace the blades annually. Otherwise, you end up with streaks all over your window, just like your car. The washer fluid, I tend to use the Rain-X type washer fluid. It seems to work the best, and you know, get the salt off pretty quickly. It will run down the side and kind of take some of your wax off, but that's the way it goes. And as far as the gel coats and maintenance up here on the fiberglass, typically you're going to want to wax. It's best if you do it a couple times per year, at least once a year. And again, with the Meguiar's Gold wax is what we're using. We're testing some new flow coat ceramic waxes this week or this summer, and we'll know what those are like next spring when we get to those boats back. So we've done some testing with that, and we'll again, we're kind of like that. Before we recommend something, we'll actually do our own testing to see if it works.
That's wise.
Stainless rails, great big solid rails. strong enough that you could stand on them if you needed to. You know, sometimes if you're tying something off or trying to get through, if you are going to stand on the rail, it's better if you stand vertical load. Don't try to push out on the side of it.
Okay.
Because you've got a long lever arm, you can actually break the seal down at the bottom, and there is an O-ring and urethane there, so it's pretty unlikely to leak, but it could. This is the vent shell for the bathroom fan here, and just kind of good to know what is that piece. These are the windows for the bathroom area, and if it's been pouring down rain, you know, if it's open, it'll end up getting water inside.
Yeah.
The acrylic, these are actually tempered glass, and this is called Solar Guard glass. I don't know if you can see, but you can probably see Larry's smiling face in the side of it.
In the reflection, for certain.
This has a baked-on ceramic coating. It's baked on at like 1500 degrees, and it reflects about 50% of the sun's energy out, which is really nice. Keeps the inside a lot cooler. If you get water spots and stuff like that, I mean, it's basically glass, the coating, but you still have to kind of be careful with it. So if you've got stains on it that don't want to come off, like a seagull pooped on it and you've washed it and you still got a little streak from that, what I found is with a real fine rag and the flitz that cleans the stainless steel, actually carefully can clean the windows too. And you know, but the windows have to be clean before you start scrubbing on them. We had one customer who started polishing on his windows before he washed them, so he ended up with a bunch of little fine scratches in them, so that's not too great. Let's see, nothing really here. These are electric horns, real reliable. On this side of the boat here, there's a waste tank here, and this goes into the liner underneath the bathroom that's down below, and there's a molded in fiberglass tank there of about 40 gallons. This is where you'd suck it out. Farther back in the boat, there's a macerator pump that lets you pump it out overboard too, if you're in an area where you can do that. In some states, they've limited that now, but that's how that works. Another thing as an owner that's kind of good to know, these are drain holes here, little weep holes for the side windows. And if these weep holes get plugged up with leaves or mold or other kind of gunk, and again, it's kind of a bucket, it's going to want to catch stuff. You know, one thing that's good to do every once in a while, every 3 or 4 months in the winter, is when you're washing the boat, make sure it's still draining out the weep holes. We had a customer this last winter that his weep holes got filled with debris, and then he ended up with water inside the boat. Another thing, if you're in kind of an icing event, the weep holes can freeze, and then it's not going to, again, no window works if the weep holes are plugged up. So. But yeah, typically washing the boat, washing the windows, get it really wet first, and then a soft bristle kind of a deal, and give it a scrub with that. One thing you never want to do, and never let anybody do to your gel coat, is some of the boat washers in Florida will get a backpack weed sprayer device, and they'll put 50% ratio of water and the pool cleaner. I want to call it hydrochloric acid or
muriatic acid.
Muriatic acid.
Yeah.
And then they'll put a little Joy soap in, mix it up, and it looks like they're spraying soapy water on the boat. Well, the muriatic acid will actually eat right into the gel coat, and it instantly takes all of the UV stabilizers. This is, $7, $8 a pound gel coat.
Yeah.
And the muriatic acid will take all that stabilizing, all the good stuff in your gel coat you spent a lot of money for. That'll take it out really quickly. Things like acetone will also wreck it if you leave it on there too long. Goof off and some of the toluene-based cleaners, you can actually wreck your gel coat. Think of your gel coat, respect it like you would your car paint. I mean, would you take muriatic acid and put it on your car paint?
No.
Anyway, people don't seem to think about that at times. So anyway, just soap and water. And again, the soap, if you spent, $1,000 or $2,000 to have the boat waxed, you don't want to use Joy soap on it. It'll it'll strip it right off. So you have to use a wax. Again, I like the McGuire's wax that's got the conditioning material in it. It's much better, keeps the boat shiny, and that's what this boat's had. And this was only waxed probably 6 months ago, and you can see it still has a nice shine to it. It's been washed with the procedure that we recommend.
Okay.
On the stainless steel, what I'll typically do is flitz the stainless steel at least once a year. And what the flitz is, it's weird stuff. It's it's got some chemical in it and some kind of super fine compound, and it basically takes stainless that might not look super, and instantly, just without a lot of elbow grease, cleans it out. You've used Flitz?
I have. That's the only one I use.
It's great stuff. Yeah,
it is.
These cleats here are newfound metal cleats. They're you know, from Port Townsend, Washington. Great big solid cleats, and the area where they bolt on is over an inch thick. There's coring material in there, and they're through bolted with 3/8 inch bolts, so they're strong enough to break the line. So that's kind of nice. Okay, Amanda, so one other kind of a small point. The Aspen letters are bonded on with the urethane adhesive. The surface was cleaned ahead of time. But if you feel, there's no sharp edges anywhere. And my guys are always doing that. As a new boat, I always check to make sure there's no sharp edges. You don't want to cut anybody along the way.
Yeah, as you're walking down.
Yeah. Other things here, this is the starboard side fuel fill. And one thing with the fuel tanks, it's got 220 gallons, but it's not like there's 120 gallons on each side, because the starboard hull is bigger. This tank is about 15 gallons bigger than the one on the port side, which means when you switch to starboard, it'll take a little bit longer for that fuel gauge to start moving on the starboard side too. And when you're boating, we'll talk about it later, you typically, there's a pull lock switch that switches from port to starboard tank. And when you're running, you typically run a couple or 3 hours on one side and then switch to the other. You kind of want to lower the fuel and then lower the other side, so you end up boat sitting level. It's funny, we'll get boats back for service and they come in, they're listing, which from a designer, just drives me crazy. I want my boats to sit just on their water lines, and they'll have full tank on one side and a quarter tank on the other. And the water, same thing. Some customers don't think about how you use your liquids to kind of keep your boat in trim. But if you want to stay fully engineering perfect, you want to keep everything level, okay? Got to be styling here, okay?
Yes.
All right.
That's what we do on Aspen.
In the cockpit here, well, let's just kind of walk through the cockpit and talk about all the different things. Starboard side here is our engine. These are all the big hatches for that. Port side is the generator side there. This comes up here. This is our easel for making drawings and stuff for future. But this is a big storage area here. You can see he's got his barbecue here and the little tube for the table that goes here. And what we want to do is open up and show you the area here for the table. You know, a lot of boats come with these big tables, but there's no place to store them. So on our boats, we tend to give you a storage compartment for the table and a little bag to put it in. And so this just is a beautiful teak table here. And
so nice.
You can see that. And it's a padded bag for it too. But in this area here is a number of different things. So this is our door raid vent here. And this is a fiberglass piece that we make at the factory, and it has the mesh, the grill baffle on the outside. Then the air has to come in through a mesh here, a plastic mesh. And basically, what I'm trying to do is slow that crystal down and catch any salt here rather than having it get into the engine room. And then these are the fuel filters here, and you've got shut-off valves. So if you're going to work on them, you can do it without having to, get a lot of air into the system. And there's actually a twist-on piece here that has a gauge that goes on top, and they're not totally reliable, but they're at least consistent with whatever they do read, and they'll tell you how much vacuum it's taking to pull the fluid through there. And that's kind of nice, because if the filter gets plugged up, then the needle starts to climb a little bit. If you're going to change the filters, it's a simple matter of undoing this cap here, and then and I would always put a towel underneath here. The last thing you want to do is spill oil down into the bilge and kind of that awful diesel smell sort of thing. Stinky stuff. But typically once a year, these are the primary filters, and they are, if I remember right, they're 10 micron filters. And there is a way, if you get a bunch of water in here, there's a plug, a brass plug that you unthread from the bottom, and then a valve you can open, and then you can drain that into a cup and store it up at the used oil zone in marinas. But the other thing that's right here is this little valve here. It's made by a company called Pollock in Michigan, and They make all the little solenoid valves that let the truckers, when you see a semi going down the road that's got the big tank, round tanks on either side of the semi, this is the valve that lets him switch from his port to starboard tank or his right to left tank on a truck. And good reliable part. And that solenoid valve is tied and powered through the same fuse that powers the fuel gauges up at the dash.
Okay.
And the idea is that if you ever get this thing stuck on a chunk of aluminum or a chunk of debris for some reason, which would be unlikely because the fuel is coming through the filter first, but if it gets stuck, it'll pop the fuse and the gauges will drop to 0. And at that point you know, okay, something's stuck. I can switch the switch all day long from port tank to starboard tank. But it isn't doing anything if the gauges are at dead, okay?
Yep.
So you need to troubleshoot what caused that and then replace the fuse. And when it does switch, you'll hear a little thunk, a clunk. And we could actually do that. Do you guys think we ought to do that?
We should show it.
All right, let's show that. I'll hit the switch and you'll kind of hear it go from port to starboard.
Okay, I'll stay here. Oh, I heard it. There you go. Very cool.
Yeah. And what that does, Amanda, is the nice part about that pull-lock valve compared to a lot of the others, it only uses power when it's in motion. And it moves to its new position and then it shuts off and it's drawing 0 amps.
Yep.
Some of the other valves are held in place with, basically a coil. And this one has a little device that, little servo that just moves it back and forth. It's a good part. Love it a lot. Amanda, the other while we're in this corner with the engine room that I want to show you is the use of this rail here. And it's just a spring-loaded thing here that comes back. And some customers will swing it or they'll have a guest and they'll leave it like that dangling. And that's not the best because you've got a 2.5 foot long lever arm. You can actually bend the hinge point. So when you open this, swing it all the way around, and there's a nice little ear here, and the trigger goes in. And then at that point, it's solid. They can lean on it, okay?
Yeah.
The other thing is that when you're going to open this door here, if you pull over here, it jams because it's twisting on the hinge. If you simply lift right near the hinge, it swings in either direction really nicely. And this is an area where a little bit of spray silicone grease will actually loosen this up pretty nice. And this window and logo here, this would get blitzed. And you can use a little bit of the Meguiar's plexiglass material on this stainless, or on the plastic here too. Every couple of years you might have to take the 3 nuts that hold this piece on and clean backside of it too. But again, this one just swings like that, and I usually swing it in while we're loading and things like that. So, okay, Amanda, so this is the engine room kind of section of our walkthrough here on an Aspen C120, and lots of good stuff to see here. And it's kind of a neat engine room in that everything that you kind of need, like 70% of the boat systems, are right here, and these hatches open and let you get right into it. So, great big hatches, great big gaskets, huge hardware. They even have O-rings in these twisters here. This is the better kind of sound deadening that actually has that rubberized lead sheet kind of stuff in it. Stainless steel gas springs, and they're pretty reliable. They're not, it's a good thing to kind of wipe those down with a little bit of Bow Shield on a rag once in a while, just keep them a little bit damp. Not damp, but just a light coat of Bow Shield on them is fine occasionally. But if you come around on this side, we can kind of look in here. Before I hop in the hole, you'll be able to see more. And so
come on the other side?
Yeah, I think so, because then our eyes are the same. So what we're looking at here, at the very back of the boat, is the rudder post and its packing gland. And you see the 2 little nuts on bolts, the vertical bolts on either side of the shaft?
I do.
Those are squished down on a synthetic kind of a rope type material that's got grease, silicone grease on it. And that keeps the water from coming out, yet still lets the rudder swing back and forth. And on a new boat, you may find that, when you're out boating, after it gets used and steered for a week or two, you'll get a little bit of wicking that comes up through that thing. And there's 2 nuts there, and one's a jam nut, and actually looking at it, they've got 3 nuts on it. But basically you have to undo the locking nuts and then tighten the two down just a half a turn or so, and then go up to the helm and see how it steers. If you get it too tight, it will be really hard to steer.
Right.
But that's just a normal thing when you start to use it, and I can't make it too tight to start with because then it's really heavy on the wheel.
Yeah.
To the right of that is the stern thruster, and the great big cables that come into that. And again, it's an area to kind of keep an eye on. There shouldn't be any water leaking through. And part of our pre-delivery inspection has been to inspect all of that beforehand. You can see the little labels there on what everything does.
Stern thruster, yeah.
Yeah. And then right at the back of it there, you see the little cover, the little plastic cover there? That keeps you from kicking the control cable that goes into it. So you have the two big battery cables.
Right.
But before we had that, people would kick that occasionally.
Yeah.
The other thing you can see here with the green wires that are kind of coiled up right in back there, those are your bonding system wires, and everything that's metal that's outside of the boat is electrically connected to those bonding wires.
Oh, nice.
And then I wish I brought my tape measure with me, but you can see where the lower coil comes over and there's a little brass thing with some threaded rod. That goes out and actually connects to the zinc on the outside of the boat.
Oh, nice.
And so, you know, that's how that's done. And all those grounding, all those bonding wires, and you know, tie back into that bonding system like a yacht would have. So that's pretty nice.
Very nice.
Other things to see here, look at all the pumps and stuff. So these are all labeled with what they do. If you go down in there, you can see this is the seawater toilet pump right here and the label for it. And I'm not sure what the next one back, you can swing down in there and you can probably see it as well. And so the nice part about these pumps is they're easy to get to.
Very easy. And if you're down in there, you can work on them.
Right, and then it's all done with PEX hoses and stuff, so if odd chance that something did freeze, you don't break the hoses in the boat. You might wreck the pump if it did freeze. You can also see the ball valve down here, and he's got his spare antifreeze tied off to the ball valve. Kind of an unusual thing, but I mean, it's not going to break it. That's a ball valve strong enough that you could stand on it. He's actually stored his oil, extra oil, along the engine room there.
I see that.
Not bad. So just kind of what it looks like. And it's an area that you want to kind of keep clean. Wash it in here once in a while. People will think, oh, I don't want to get anything wet. And fresh water is the best thing to keep your things looking new and nice. All the metal parts here, I would typically wipe with a little bit of Bow Shield or the steering ram. Same thing. The other thing, if you stick your camera down in here, you'll see the steering ram here. Let's see, maybe I can hold it. You got it? So you can see the steering ram here, and then just behind it is a rudder position indicator. That's a Garmin tool, and basically it shows which way the rudder's pointing, and it lets the autopilot know which direction the rudder. It's kind of a smaller piece in behind. I might be able to put my finger.
Yep, I see it.
You
now,
see it?
Yep.
Okay, good. Rudder position indicator from Garmin. And yeah, let's switch around. I'll stand in here. Oh, the floorboard here is removable, and that helps you get to the pumps, and there's a shaft seal underneath there too.
Okay.
And our shaft seals, maybe we can get a picture of that when I get in here. The shaft seals we use it's a modified Norscot shaft seal that we start with, and it's a bronze piece that has 3 lip seals in it that are kind of that run in automatic transmission fluid, that red fluid, and so they are always running a lubricant, and it's oil. Some of the guys will use lip seals, but they're trying to lubricate them with salt water, which doesn't really work very well. The other possible way to do a shaft seal, and we used to do these, is a PYI shaft seal that's a face seal type of design, and we had some issues with those not always working right, because the tension that keeps the seal in place is the actual rubber bellows or a silicone bellows, and that was sort of an inconsistent spring, if you will. Instead of actually having a stainless spring inside it, which is what I originally thought, they actually are using the rubber material as the spring. And people don't think about it, but the motor moves forward on its rubber mounts as you throttle up. You know, it goes from no load to, you know, 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of push on the engine through the mounts, and that drags the shaft forward, which then takes the tension off the seal, and you'll get some spraying and misting. Salt water in the engine, it's not generally a good idea.
Right.
So let's open this hatch and take a look in here.
Okay.
Let's see. All right, so Amanda, here what we're doing, you know, just basically looking at this big, beautiful, I guess for me anyway, it's a beautiful engine. I love this Volvo D6 440 horse motor. And we're doing one now with a 480, although it's the only one we've ever done that way. So inline 6-cylinder Volvo, built in Sweden. It's a very industrial kind of an engine. It holds 5.7 gallons of oil when you change it. It has a pre-oil filter and then a final oil filter. So again, like you'd see on a big tractor engine or something like that, or a truck engine. So they're really setting this up to be a very long life, heavy duty engine. It weighs about 1,680 pounds with the gear. And a really nice engine. It's electronically fuel injected, and it's turbocharged and supercharged. So at lower RPMs, the supercharger can boost some extra air into the combustion chambers and give you better fuel efficiency, which is what we like a lot. All the service points on the Volvo are really just literally right here. So your dipstick is right over here, and if you have to put oil in, it's right here. Typically, when you're going to add oil, it's when you change the engine oil. On all of these, in all the years, in 6 years of using D6s or any of the Volvo engines, we've never had to add oil once to any of the motors. It's just like your car, they don't use much oil anymore. The precision that they build the things with is so tight that unless something's gone wrong or a hose has come off, you don't typically use any oil. So people will ask, do I check my engine oil every time or every day? And honestly, I have more owners that goof up and they leave this up. They push it down, but they don't go
spray.
Click. And because it's a positive crankcase engine system, if you leave the cap here, the dipstick up, it will literally blow oil out of that. And I tell you what, in this motor, if you did that, that'd be a lot of oil in the bilge of the boat, and probably enough to where the bilge pumps would come on, and you'd have an oil slick too. So if you're going to check your oil, you know, you basically are going to pull that out, and you can see that, you know, the oil is right there at the right spot, the upper end of it. It's relatively clean too. One thing with diesel engine, the oil will get dirty relatively quickly. That's normal. So don't worry about that if you change your oil and it's still a little bit colored. You know, when they run, there's a little bit of soot that leaks by. But the really big thing, if you're going to check your oil, you have to do this. Click it back down until it won't go anymore. We've had 2 owners with the smaller engines, the Volvos, the D3, that were checking their oil every day, and then they forgot to push that down all the way. And one guy ran his engine out of oil twice with all his oil in his bilge. Did it twice. He kept running with the horn going on too. And then he put more oil in it and ran it again. It ran, he got 2,500 hours out of it, and he ran it out of oil twice in the 2,500. So hard to say how long one will last if you don't run it empty on oil and keep running the engine. So, so that's kind of an interesting thing. This is your raw water strainer here. So the ball valve for the boat is kind of down around in this corner here. So the raw water comes in through this ball valve, and then it comes into the engine, goes through 2 rubber bellows there, so that as the motor's wiggling around, there's you see the 2 rubber bellows here, one here and one there. Those let the engine move around and not pull on the engine or pull on the through hull indiscriminately. You want some flexibility there, and also you'd have vibration coming into the boat if you didn't do that. If you ever get towed, you absolutely have to turn off that high-speed pickup, because what'll happen is the high-speed pickup will pressurize it through the engine, and then the engine, when it gets done with the cooling water, dumps it into the exhaust, which goes into the muffler. And so if you're not running the motor, there's no air pressure to push the water out of the muffler and up over the top and out the back. And what'll happen is you'll fill your muffler, water lift muffler, fill it with water, and then it just fills salt water right up into the engine, and then it pours into the engine that's sitting there not running. Okay, so you definitely need to turn off the ball valve. And if you look here, there's actually a little label that says what you're supposed to do there, right here. And so it basically, and
Oh, here. You gotta go down.
Here we go. And all in the shade.
Is it? Can you see it?
There we go. Anyway, there's a label there that says what you're supposed to do.
Okay.
So another good thing to do is occasionally you want to grab the lever here for the shut-off and actually cycle it off and on.
Okay.
So down is on and up is off. And you need to do that occasionally just to keep the valve so it'll work. And if you're going to take and clean the strainer here, the strainer is actually above the water line, so you know, but not by a lot, so you got to be a little careful with it. But basically, I'll take a towel and stuff it around underneath this, and then you crack this open, and you'll wiggle the lid up a little bit and let a little bit of air in, which will let the water drain out. Okay. And once the water level has gone down, then you can pull the strainer out with not getting too much water in the boat. But basically, the water pours in through this round hole here, goes through the strainer basket, and then into the engine. And you can see there's a little bit of kelp in there right now, but not a lot. And I wouldn't worry about it. But the one thing is you don't want to just take that off and get a bunch of salt water on the engine, because right below this is a $2,000 accessory alternator. And if you pour a bunch of salt water on an electrical device, generally
They don't like that.
it's a bad idea. The other thing that's right here is the primer. So when you're running along and you forget to flip the fuel switch, and we have this one owner that does it at least once a year, and usually driving from the flybridge because he doesn't have fuel gauges up there, and he'll run low. He's gotten to the point where the motor coughs and he comes down and switches the switch right away.
Right.
If you do need to prime it, you basically can prime right here. And this is a bleeder hose where you can stick a hose on and do it. Most of the owners won't do that. They'll just prime until it gets hard, like right there. It won't go down anymore. Then you crank it a cycle, and then do it again and crank it a cycle. And usually within 2 or 3 cranks, you'll get it to go. Now again, you have to be careful if you're doing a bunch of cranking and the motor doesn't start. Then you've got your mufflers filling up with water again. And so you can actually, you know, after about 5 or 6 cranks, if it hasn't sputtered some, then you potentially are going to fill your motor with your muffler with water, and you'll have to go take the quarter berth cushions out and go down there and open the ball valve on the muffler and drain the muffler. Okay. The other thing that's right here underneath this is the fuel filter for the boat, and that needs to be changed about every 1,000 gallons of fuel. And so, and it's right here. Really good thing to have a wrench for that. And it takes a really legitimate wrench to get it on and off. They're spun on and they kind of get stiff. So don't buy the $1.99 wrench. Buy the $39.99 wrench that works. Other things here, these are little sensors here for fuel flow. And so if you do run out of fuel, these are the sensors that'll tell the computer up front that you know, your fuel rail pressure is low. The other thing is right here is your antifreeze. Goes in right here, and you have to use the Volvo antifreeze. And if you can look in here, can you see there's a little plastic ear here and here? Right there, that little plastic ear. The liquid has to come up to about the plastic ear, just over it. And if you go above the plastic ear, then it'll spit the extra antifreeze out. If you get below, then it'll tell you in the computer that, you know, you're low on antifreeze. So it just kind of wants it at a certain point. And you have to use the actual Volvo antifreeze here. If you mix the Volvo antifreeze with, say, the Fleet Guard that a Cummins uses, which is blue, it turns to jello in the motor. And jello in your cooling system is not good. So that's really kind of a key thing to do there. And again, when the cap comes off, you got to put the cap back on or it'll spray antifreeze everywhere. If you ever do spill a bunch of antifreeze on your motor, it's acid, kind of like you know, salt water. It'll corrode and rust everything really a lot. So if you do spill a bunch, you've got to wash it off fairly quickly. Oil in here, just basically a cap like that. Pretty straight up.
Pretty simple.
And again, you got to put it back in until it won't turn anymore. Other things here, there's a sensor right here I wanted to point out. You see this right here? Right under here. This sensor right here is a oil pressure sensor. Or it might be it's the engine temperature sensor. Anyway, I've had it where the engine will come on and it'll give you a warning that the temperature sensor, I think it's temperature or oil, but I think it might, I'm not sure, it's either temperature or oil. Anyway, I've had it where all I had to do to fix it, and I was a hero, was push the trigger and pull this off and on, and the contacts in here had gotten a little dirty.
Oh, I see.
And so just, you know, something to know about. So there's that. This is your supercharger, right? Well, no, this is computers here. There's an emergency stop button right here on the back of the motor, like right in here. Just good to know that it's there.
Yep.
This one has the cover on for everything that you service that you might have trouble with. Or, you know, I mean, the water pumps, the alternators, the accessory belt are all right here on this end of the motor. Really easy to get to. I have a couple of owners that have taken the cover off because they want to be able to see what's going on there. Other owners are like, gee, I mean, what if I get my hair or something in there and it would really be a bad day? So they keep the cover on. I'd recommend keeping the cover on. But you ought to get used to taking it off occasionally and looking underneath there. Let's see. Some people will walk on top of their motor, but to me it's a $70,000 motor. I tend to not walk on it.
Be a little more gentle.
You know, be real careful with it. These are the oil filters right here, and your pre-filter and your final filter. And then the intercooler is right behind that. I don't know if you can see back up in here is the intercooler. Let's actually open that other hatch. It's easier to see. And to open this hatch, you swing this to that side. This goes here, and up it comes. And there's the rest of the engine. So it's a good sized engine. Intercooler here, so that takes the salt water from the engine and cools the antifreeze water that's in the engine. This is your turbocharger here, and then that's your exhaust riser elbow there. And again, you see it's got a big rubber bellows there. Actually, it's made out of silicone. And that goes down into the muffler. There's a new thing we're doing, Amanda, where we had one owner in 6 years that did this, but he was able to shut his motor off, and because he always had his boat full of fuel, full of water, and his bigger dinghy on the back, he was sitting deeper than most of the guys. And when he shut off his engine, occasionally the vanes in the water pump would shut off in a position where it let water flow right back through. And he was able to get a siphon started that would fill up his muffler. He was gone from the boat, and he'd come back and the muffler was full of water, and when you go to crank the boat up, it would be kind of a funny start. So we've just added a new, and this boat should get it, a vented up loop right here. So it raises the water level by about another 10 inches above what it is on this boat. So no matter how, you can't ever get any water to, you know, vent without
Vent
that
back.
to backflow into the, you can't get a siphon start. It's basically a siphon break for the water on the engine. It also gives you a little overboard P point on the engine so that if the water gets to that high point, when it's running, it pushes water out the side of the boat. You can see it peeing out the side. When you shut off, the water drains out back downhill and air can go back in, and that lets all the water in the engine go back down to water level on the outside instead of being able to start a siphon and pull more water in. So kind of a new thing. When you're doing oil changes and stuff, your mechanic will take this cap off right here, and he'll take his 5-gallon bucket, and hopefully he has a 7-gallon bucket with him, not a 5.
Okay.
Because a 5-gallon bucket, when you hook it up and start sucking, it's going to put 7/10 of a gallon out on the floor. So much better to have a bigger bucket. And he'll suck the oil out there. Then he'll undo these and drain those with a towel underneath so he doesn't get any water in the engine room. And then this is another filter right here. This is the crankcase breather filter, and it's a positive crankcase, so you have to have this down tight, and then instead of venting here, it vents through that filter. And that filter also gets changed when you're changing the engine oil. If you don't change that, you can usually skip one oil change, but by the end of the second oil change, it'll have plugged up to the point where it's starting to push oil out in places where you don't want it. So it's good to change that occasionally. This is your air filter right down here. Again, you know, some people change them annually. We usually look at them. If there's any dirt in it at all, then we'll change it. A lot of the engine, you know, you're going to want to spray with Bow Shield occasionally, especially the engine mounts here. They're great big metal engine mounts underneath the engine, and they're actually mild steel, and they'll corrode if you don't spray them with corrosion block occasionally. And they can't make them out of stainless steel because it's not a strong enough metal for what this engine needs. So you have to spray the engine mounts, and a good mechanic will do those things for you. Let's see, other things here. Here you've got a fuse for the, this is the accessory alternator fuse here. And other things here, this is one of the valves. So if you're going to switch the boat from freshwater toilets to saltwater toilets, there's a Y valve here that you switch, but there's also a separate a valve here that you also have to switch on and off. Oh, there's a shutoff right here. So this one is running on freshwater toilets right now. So the freshwater, the blue, is coming in through here, and with the valve positioned like this, it's going off to the two different toilets right now. If you wanted to switch to run them on saltwater, let's say you're going to go out cruising with a big group of people and you're trying to save your fresh water, then you might want to run them on saltwater. On the small boats, they're all on saltwater all the time. And saltwater's fine, it's just that when you leave the boat, you have to either take the shower wand and run some fresh water in the toilet so it's not sitting with salt water in it.
Keeping it stinky a little bit.
Or you have to either switch to fresh water that doesn't have bacteria.
Yep.
Or if you keep salt water in it, you have to take a little bit of white vinegar and put it in the bowl. Don't put chlorine in the bowl of the toilet because it'll wreck the rubber parts over time.
Yep.
So other things here, there's a lot in this engine room. Down right underneath the back of the engine here is the shaft seal, and it's all sitting in, you know, silicone rubber pieces that let it flex and float around nicely. It's a Norscot shaft seal, and there's an oil tank for it. You know, this one might have the PYI shaft seal, but you'll basically see a little oil tank mounted over here on the boats that have, on the newer boats that have the Norscot shaft seal. And again, trying to find that shaft seal that'll run, you know, 5 or 10 years with very, very little maintenance is kind of what our whole goal is here.
I'm sure you'll find it.
Yeah. Let's close this and look in here. Let's look along here because there's some switches and stuff in here that are really good to see. So if you go down a little lower, I think you can see. Will it rotate up? Right in here. Okay, so what we've got here are the stern thruster battery switch and the emergency parallel switch here, and then farther forward are the breaker for the davit and for the aft panel that's here in the cockpit. So basically the power comes in off the house batteries and then, you know, feeds these things right here. I typically leave the stern thruster on unless I'm working on it. If I had people or grandkids swimming in the water, I might turn this off just so I didn't have to worry about them, because it's a 3.5 horsepower or maybe even more motor. If the kids get in there, get anywhere near it, and another kid starts thrustering, it'll actually suck them over to it, and you don't want that. Emergency parallel here is just that. It's for emergency, and basically it ties the start battery to the house battery bank. And it's the kind of thing, if you're using it, it's typically one of two things. You've run your house batteries flat with your refrigerator or something while you were gone, and you need to pair it. Think about that as one battery's at 0 at sea level and the other one's at 10,000 feet, and when you flip this switch, man,
you both come down.
Yeah. Plus, it is really hard on both batteries. All of a sudden, you're putting like 4,000 watts into one battery and pulling that much out of another. So, kind of thing that you do it and then get it started and let it run for 3 or 4 minutes and then turn it back off.
Okay.
The only other thing that you might need there is that if, let's say that your engine's alternator failed, and you're on a long trip in Alaska and you want to keep going, instead of running the generator, you can turn on the parallel, and now the house, you'll basically
Charge
use
by the alternator.
your adventure alternator over here will charge everything up too. And Volvo has a program, when you fill out the warranty, they will come out and do a training with you for a couple of hours. And the mechanic will go through everything and how to take care of it, and basically show you a lot about how it works and how to care for it. But they also to kind of develop a relationship with you, so that if you do need care down the road, you know who to call.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, good solid engine. So far in 6 years with Volvo D6s, I don't know that we've ever had one stop. We've had guys, have to fiddle with their fuel because they ran out of one tank or the other. And we've had guys wind crab pots up on the shaft and stop that. But actually, the one guy with a Ford, he was able to put it in reverse and unwind the crab pot, which is pretty lucky, actually.
Very.
So, okay, so one thing we didn't talk about is what kind of service intervals, what kind of maintenance do we want to do on this motor to keep it beautiful and running great for the next 30 years, right? So first thing is oil changes. We typically do the oil change at 50 hours, and the gearbox is also going to get its oil changed and its filter screen cleaned at 50 hours. Volvo guys say you can go to 100 hours. For my old school of thinking, it's better just get the original oil out of there, because again, when the both motors being manufactured, there's usually a little bit of metal filings and stuff like that. I like to get those out of the motor soon and start with fresh oil. And then typically it's every 100 hours after that you'll get an oil change. The water pump on the motors is an amazingly tough, robust pump, and again, way bigger than the competitive pumps that we've looked at and used in some of our other boats. The Volvo guys are really after industrial raw water pumps. But that will typically get the impellers changed every year. This accessory belt, I would inspect that to see if there's any dusting and powdering from that. If there is, you want to change it. Typically that would get changed every 2 years. The actual raw water pump housing, I think you want to change the whole housing and its bearings and everything about every 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
The transmission oil is something they want you to have changed every 200 hours. Again, every time you're servicing it, you always want to finish with, hopefully you've been washing the engine with fresh water occasionally. I typically do that on my boat about every 60 days when I'm using it, and I'll come back and wash the boat, and then the motor's cooled down, and then I'll come back in and spray the engine off with fresh water. Sounds weird, but fresh water is going to be a big part of what keeps all that rust from kind of giving you grief over time. The saltwater air, just the air around the ocean, is kind of got salt crystals in it.
Yep.
And if you don't get it off there occasionally, then you're going to end up with, but you don't want to spray salt water on a really hot motor. If it's cooled down, it's been an hour, then you're probably good to mist it off a little bit. And I'm not just saying just flood it with water, but and then what I'll do again, I'll take a towel, roll it up, and set it in the gutter and set the hatch down. And that way I don't leave these, because I'll come back in the boat and I forgot what I was doing. I just step on instantly. So you don't want to do this where you open the hatch and then do that. Where the twister tang is what's holding the hatch up. That's the absolute wrong thing to do, because somebody's going to step on the boat, bend your hatch latch. And so much better to put a towel underneath there to get a little gap and leave this so that the tang isn't in the gutter, messing it up. When you do an oil change, you're going to do 2 filters, the oil, and typically a crankcase breather filter as well. And then let's see, what else is there? Oh, this one has a supercharger on it as well, and the supercharger needs to have its oil changed as well, and it has a belt as well.
Okay.
The other thing some owners will do is they'll have a kit of parts that, and Volvo has it, comes in a little box of spare parts. So it's the oil filters, the belts, and all that in a little package. And the nice part about that is, even if your mechanic doesn't use it, at least he knows what the parts are that went into the motor. He's got a comparison to it. And if you're going up to Alaska, to get to Alaska, you're typically going to need an oil change while you're up there. And so you want to make sure you have those parts with you. Although depending where you go, Juneau's got a Volvo guy that's probably got the parts too. I use the Chevron Delo industrial motor oil. Some guys have talked about synthetic and things like that. I think we just use what Volvo recommends. Let's see. I think that's it for service. Okay, so here we are, Amanda. We're going to go down into the port engine room. This is where our generator's at. Let me open this up and give you a flavor for what's down here. This is a Kohler 6 kW diesel generator, and we've used these for about 5-6 years now. They've been wonderful, very reliable, and we only had one issue, and that was with a little bit too much smoke when they were cold starting. And we talked to the president of the company, and they took care of that for us, and actually retrofitted all the boats too. So, but nice, reliable power, and really easy access for service. And it's as big as you can fit in here, and really have easy access for service. There's a bunch of other stuff in here too. You've got the muffler for the generator. You've got the freshwater pumps, and these freshwater pumps we use now are right back here. These are SureFlow pumps. And they are a variable volume, variable speed pump, very expensive, but again, really, really reliable. Made in the United States, so good solid pump. You can see all the PEX plumbing there. The black deal on the bottom corner there is the water lift muffler for the generator, and you can also see the ball valves and stuff for that. And there's two steps of that. There's a water lift at the bottom, and then there's another generator muffler that's at the top, so it's kind of double muffler, very, very quiet, which is what we want. Here, I'm going to step down in there. Actually, you can see from there, you can see the fuel filter for the generator. The pre-filter is right here. It's got shutoffs on it. This little hose that's coiled up here goes over and around and into the generator, and it's set up so that you can uncoil the hose, pull the cap, pull the plug, and open the valve and drain the oil from the generator really easily to change the oil on the generator.
Nice.
Then let me open this hatch here. Maybe while I'm out of there, it's easiest. So you just push that, this tips out, and look at how easily that comes out.
Nice.
And now you've got access right here to all the service points on the engine. So this is your fuel filter over here, up in this corner here. Your raw water pump is right here. Again, easy to get to with its belt. The antifreeze is right there. Oil goes down in the yellow plug there. And then you've got your oil filter over on the far side. Your starter is even right here. Filter, boy, everything that you service on a Kohler is literally right behind this little hatch.
That's great.
And I know you're thinking about getting a generator for your new boat. I would think about one of these Kohlers.
Yeah.
It also has a little computer control screen over here on this far side here, and you can start it from that point and stop it. If the control inside was to fail for some reason, then you can stop that right there. And you have easy service. This floorboard here is removable, so you can get to the bilge down there, and there's a bilge pump underneath there. And then you can see how all the hoses and valves are labeled. Again, these through-hole shutoffs here, these are the force bar type through-hole ball valves, and they're plastic, so there's nothing to corrode away.
That's nice.
They're glass reinforced nylon. They're strong enough that they have to take a 500-pound load. Notice everything is double hose clamped, and all those hoses are Triton hoses made in the United States. We also include a little power outlet here, so that in the wintertime you could put one of those warm plates in here and keep this a little drier, and keep it so you don't have any corrosion and stuff like that in here. Some people will even put a dehumidifier in here in the winter
Smart,
when kind of keep it dry, keep it all fresh and nice. So again, the gel coat here is base coat, and then we overcoat it with a clear enamel so that it's a surface that even if you spill some dirt on it, or oil, you can wipe it off and clean it up, versus some guys will leave raw base coat. Let me climb in there and see if there's anything I'm missing. So these are nice footsteps too. So this is the strainer for the generator here, and again, if you're going to take and clean that, you'll have to shut off the ball valve down here, and there. Now the valve is off, and at that point I can undo the cap and wiggle this off. Occasionally you're going to have to take a little silicone grease and grease that big square O-ring in there so that it slides on and off nicely.
Yeah.
And this just tightens back down on it. and you'll pull that strainer out. It'll have a bunch of junk in it, and this strainer is the one you'll probably work on the most, because when you're sitting there anchored, it'll be drawing in seaweed and all kinds of junk. We had one customer last year that got a little eel stuck in here.
Aww.
And he spent all kinds of time fiddling around with it, and finally Brandon, you know, basically pressurized it from here and pushed the eel back out that way.
Yeah.
With a garden hose. Waste tank is underneath here, and our waste tanks are double thickness, so they're 1/4 inch thick, so you don't have any smell from them. Even chafe protection on the hoses up here, kind of nice. This is that control panel right here for the Kohler. Oil filter, starter. There is a breaker right in the corner here, and a lot of guys will miss that. And there's also some little fuses here too. So if you try to run more than 6,000 watts out of it, it'll trip the breaker.
Okay.
And so you have to, it's the guy that's running 2 air conditioners, and then he also turns on, you know, a great big blender. Hair dryer, yeah. And let's see, here's another fuel filter here, antifreeze here, oil in there. Dipstick is, let me think about where that dipstick is. It's gotta be right here. Maybe it is right here. I could swear it had a separate dipstick. It must be this yellow cap right here. This is our raw water pump. The one thing, if you do, you know, plug up the inbound water and melt the water pump, which is what people will do, it's not just a matter of replacing the water pump impeller. You got to actually get an equal amount of rubber parts back out of the engine. So that means you'll have to take the covers off and go chasing for rubber parts. This is the belt right here. Don't seem to ever have to do anything with those. But whether it's the engine or the generator, if you do melt an impeller, you're going to need to
Go chase those little...
go chase the little bits.
I have had to do that.
Yeah, it's actually usually more work than changing the impeller, finding all the parts out. And some guys get tricky and they'll take and clean a vacuum cleaner and then vacuum backwards and suck them out instead of having to take everything apart. I've seen all kind of, you know, I don't care how you get the rubber parts.
As long as you do them, and then you play puzzle pieces.
Right, right. This is one of those jobs, it's not a bad thing to hire a mechanic for. A little bit of stand on your head kind of project, but anyway, this cover here, when you put it back in, it's got 2 little tangs on it, and you just gotta line the tangs up at the same time that it's centered in the opening.
Okay.
And so there's one, and it goes really easy when you have it in the right spot.
That's how you know. It's in the right spot.
See, it just went right into the right spot, and then you're good. Nice little generator. Really, other than impellers, that's all we've ever had to do. And these new SureFlow pumps, also really reliable. They do have an inline filter in them right here, and we've had a couple of owners that got debris in their water tanks, and then they plugged up those inline filters. But again, it's a deal where you unscrew it and clean it off. Good to go. While I'm standing here, this is our storage area. He's got a spare anchor here, a Fortress anchor, and this is the winch for the davit here. And this is a 12-volt winch, and it's one thing with it, it's a very reliable motor again. Nice little planetary gear set in it. But what people don't realize is that because it's a planetary gear set, it will slowly unwind the boat into the water if you forget to put the stainless steel jumper struts on. So you got to pull it up and then clip the struts in, because if there's load on the line, it'll slowly, you know, by the time you come back the next morning, if it's just one day, it'll be about halfway into the water. And if you go another day, it'll be all the way in.
Yep.
It's kind of a weird thing. He's got a spare shore power cord here, some extra dock lines. So one thing while we're talking about things that are in here that are kind of fun. So for a boat this size, this is a 1/2-inch dock line, which is as big as I would go. Some of the guys will get 5/8. I think he's got one of those here. And then some guys even have 3/4-inch dock lines. You know, I mean, this is good for 6,600 pounds, just this one line. Even the 3/8 are good for 4,000 pounds. So you're just not going to get that much wind load when you're at the dock, and having to handle all those thicker lines all the time is foolish. You know, in the winter time, if you're going to tie up and be gone for 3 or 4 months, and then maybe you want to use a thicker line for that, where you know you might be chafing on it. But and then make sure you get the nylon lines. Some of the guys, you can buy polyester lines that are not, they almost look the same. They're cheaper, but they don't wear nearly as well. The nylon is a much tougher line. The other thing with the dock line that's kind of good is once a year, and usually in the spring, get a bucket with a whole bunch of hair conditioner and softener and let them soak in that and dry out with that, and then you'll have lines that are pliable again. You know how they get stiff and icky?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Some people buy new dock lines. It's actually, you know, kind of a...
You don't have to, yeah.
You don't have to. Okay, so Amanda, I just want to finish up some of the things that are in the back cockpit here for maintenance and stuff like that. So first thing is teak cockpit table. It's like a $1,000 table. This is Duratec finish, and it's real teak, so it's great material. But when you're not going to be using this, if you're out cruising, there's a canvas cover that you can put on it, and that's what I would do when I'm cruising. But when I come back with my boat, what I'll do is I grab this and I simply carry it inside and I set it in the dinette and keep it out of the weather when I'm not using the boat. Same thing with these seats. They just come right out. I put these in the quarter berth and kind of get them out of the way. So that's kind of just maintenance kind of a thing. Here again, if I was going to be gone for a few weeks, I'd slide the cushion out. In here, there's a couple things that I need to show you too, for kind of an ownership thing. When you're not using the davit, if you swing around and look in here, there's a switch that turns off the power to that motor we looked at. There it's up is on, down is off, and then this is the controller for that. A real nice quick controller. It has up and down buttons, and it even has a light if you want, if the power was on. And then this comes back in here and latches in like that. Really nicely done. The thing is the reason we gave the off switch here is we had a customer who was putting an awful lot of stuff in here, and then he would shut this lid, and the lid was up a little bit, and then when he sat on it, the winch started working. Oh. And so much better to give him a way to disable it. He also had grandkids, and they wanted to play with the winch a lot, so gave him an off for that. Great big storage area here though. Yeah, nicely done.
He's got his grill down in there, huh?
Yeah, and he's got a few cushions. One thing I want to do, you see this cushion still has the little plastic bag on it? This, if you were to let it get wet and set it on the table, that ink will transfer to the fiberglass, and it literally is terrible to get off. I mean, you know, one little bag that costs 3 cents could take you 2 hours to get off of the boat. So
you're doing him a favor.
I'm doing a favor. Get rid of this while you can, because
all the little tricks.
The tricks, yeah.
Because this has happened to you before now.
Yes, that's it. So this is good to see. This is the typical barbecue. You know, the guy's not a big barbecue guy. You know, just needs a basic barbecue, and this goes into the rod holder on the side of the boat. And normally there'd be a bag for that too. And this is the part that falls in, and you can either lose it by unthreading there, or this will come out as well. So I keep an extra one of these on my boat. They're like 29 bucks, but when I'm up in Canada, and you can't buy one of these in Canada, and I want to be able to barbecue. So just little details. Dock lines, that's about it for right in here. That's off. Over here, there's another hatch here. I'm going to show you what's in here. And this is basically access to the Macerator pump for the holding tank on this side, and the battery switch for your generator. So if you're going to work on the generator, here's the power supply to turn off the 12 volt power to the generator. And this is a great big 7-gallon per minute diaphragm pump for moving the waste out of the holding tank. And this is Trident triple wall hose here, so you never have any smells from that. Kind of a stinky job that if you do have to replace that. Actually, I don't know if we've ever had to replace one. We've had it where the little one-way bellows piece that's in there that lets the liquid go one way has gotten plugged up with nuts and stuff like that. But anyway, too much information.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how'd you know it was nuts, Larry?
I've had to work on them. And then that step goes there. This is just that little cooler here, and it's gasketed all the way around. Really a nice, kind of like your own little Yeti, only it's thicker and even more insulated than a Yeti. Drain plug there, a couple of bricks of ice, and you can hold an awful lot of drinks in there. Cool. And then there's a stretcher deal here. This is the 12-volt supply for everything that you might need to run and power that's on the back deck. And so, you know, your deck lights are there, your overhead lights, your underwater lights, and your seawater washdown pump are there, and then some spares as well. And the one thing that's not so obvious is these little deals here are push to reset breakers. So let's say that you have one of your aft deck lights, one of these little courtesy lights here. It's an LED light. Half the time when they fail as a dead short. And instead of an old light bulb where it would fail open, these LED lights fail and it'll pop the breaker. So if you do that a couple times and it pops, you need to go chase backwards and find out which one of the LED lights isn't working and replace it.
Okay.
So I think that's it for the back cockpit. I mean, just a couple things with the door and the window that flips up. So the door, to get it to shut, if you just kind of shut it like that, it won't go very well. There's this great big gasket here, so you have to kind of bonk it a little bit to get it to work. Another thing that makes it work really smoother is a little bit of chapstick on the actual striker piece here. You'll find that it just glides a little better than that. The other things to understand is there's a magnet here to hold the door open. And that'll work when you're at the dock, but it's not very strong and it's not going to work when you're out in the ocean. If you want to have this open when you're out cruising around, then you've got a latch here that goes around and basically snaps it to the rail here, okay? So, you know, on some of the boats, owners will just use a small bungee cord too, which is not the end of the world. The other thing is that when you open this window here, you got this comes up. The gas spring helps, but it won't hold it all the way up. It's just too big a piece of glass. So it comes up and there's a little latch here, and you got to make sure it's latched all the way. And when that is latched and this is open, a lot of times customers will not do the snap strap, and then when you let that bang, and come around and take a look what happens. This is starting to get it. You can see how the paint is just a little bit worn here.
Just a little.
And the same thing up here. So you want to try to avoid that. Anytime you're going to chip the powder coating, and this is a powder coat and they clear coat it, so it's 2 coats of powder, but it's really tough, but you don't really want to do that. Another thing that's interesting is when people are washing their boats, they tend not to wash the stainless steel pieces. For some reason, even the grills on the outside of the boat, the air intake, that big stainless piece, they'll wash the boat but not the grill. You want to spray everything with fresh water and get the salt off, including the door locks and stuff like that. So, yeah, this is a German lock actually. Great big solid piece. Okay, I just wanted to touch that. Okay, Amanda, a couple things on the stairs here. Big solid treadles and everything, but one thing most people don't realize is that the tread spacing is all the same until you get to the bottom 2 treads. And I had to move those back a little bit so that we could have this hatch here to get to the generator. So that's something to kind of understand when you're, you know, with new guests and stuff. You tell them to use it with their toes pointing forward. And at the top, you'll grab the radar arch and kind of use that to rotate, to go down. Always go up and down the stairs with your toes going forward. One other thing about the stairs that people don't realize is that the flybridge is all shaped in a way where it drains to the ascent. There's like a sump at the top of the stairs, and all of that comes down the left tube here, goes down in, and then goes out through a through hull. And you know, we just a couple days ago had one of these where it wasn't draining correctly, and we got to clean it out. It was full of potato chips. So they must have had a grandkid potato chip party upstairs, and in the process they washed all the potato chips down the tube, and you know, they don't go down the tube very well. So
Note to self.
no potato chips in down the drain tube.
Okay.
And when we get to the top, I'll show you the sump and stuff there. So good. Let's just go up here and kind of show you this area here.
Here's that grill you were talking about.
Yeah, we just talk about it right here.
Yep.
So this is that grill that's kind of a sump that collects all the water from the flybridge, and it does have a mesh underneath it, and basically once a year you're going to have your mechanic pull the 4 screws out and then pull the grate out, and you can clean that area, and then when you put it back you'll put a dab of silicone grease in or silicone seal in each one of the screws and screw it back down. Make sure you don't go crazy tight with the screws, because you don't want to strip them out, but that's just kind of how that works right there. And then come on up, and so here I'll just show you, yeah. So here, if you're going to use the stairs, I'll typically come over to the arch and just grab that and get started with my toes facing forward. You want to kind of show your guests to do it that way. The other thing that's nice about this hatch is that it has a safety jumper strut here. So, and it comes over here and parks like that, and then this can come back and forth. The reason we do that is I had a friend who had a big Nordhaven, and in heavy weather with the boat rolling and windy, their big hatch fell on her, and it wasn't a good day. So that's why we put this jumper strut here. And you'll find that when people are up here, they're going to be walking back and forth. They want to use this as a handhold. And if you don't have the jumper strut in place, then all the load comes back to the gas spring, and that's just, it's just not a very strong point. So kind of a good thing to see. Other things that are kind of fun here, if you're ever going to be doing the Great Loop, there's a couple of bridges around Chicago where, depending on the water level, we're right at about 17 feet 6. Some of them are 18.2, and I think there might be one that's 17.6. So if the water's really high, you might have to fold the radar arch. To do that, you pull this pin, you take these 4 nuts off, and then this rotates back on this pin here. These pies are here so that you can kind of feed the wires in and out as you rotate the radar arch. This radar arch and bimini top is all done with 1.25 inch stainless tube. Big solid stuff. All the set screws are Loctited in and so forth. You do need to check them occasionally and just make sure that all the pins and screws are in place. The canvas up on top here is all Sunbrella, and it's great for rain and stuff. If you're going to get a bunch of snow, though, this is not going to take much snow load, and occasionally you need to adjust the front strut so that you keep this tight, and the water will shed that way correctly. You don't want to get it stretched out too much. In back here, we can just kind of squeeze through, and I'll show you the back end of the mast here and the radar arch. So Joe got it with a track vision so that he could watch TV and kind of get information as well. And we had that for him. This is a 24-mile Garmin radar. Really nothing, no maintenance issues here. You may occasionally want to stand up on this and wash off any bird poop that gets on this umbrella and things like that. Again, lots of stainless here to flitz occasionally. This vinyl that we use is Olympus vinyl, and it's about 6 times the wear resistance of normal vinyls. It's made in the US. It's really tough. And all of these cushions, if you look at the back side of them, all have the mesh part of it, so that if it does get wet, it will dry. And typically when you're using the boat, you'll leave the cushions on, but you don't necessarily want to have all this upholstery get wet. If you do, it'll last a couple of years, and then it'll start to kind of rot, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have the tonneau cover for it. So, and what I'll do is I'll put the tonneau cover up, leave this area here open, and then I'll slide the rest of the outside cushions up underneath here on the deck, and that seems to work really quite well. Other things that aren't so obvious, this comes up here. You have a great big storage area here, and it's not totally dry. It's about 98% dry, but you know, good to have a big storage area. This backrest here also has two positions. If you see, there's a stainless socket here as well on both sides, so you can pull that up and slide it forward, and you have a really big sun lounge.
Lounge, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. This table is kind of fun. It you know, it can do this, it can do that, it can rotate like that. That seat can swivel around so that you can actually have a real comfortable dinner up here if you want and enjoy. Or if it's going to be more of a loungy kind of day, then you can fold that and have a shorter piece which still gives you walking room. And there's locks here if you want to hold it in place. This comes with a big canvas cover, and when we're out just cruising around with the grandkids and stuff, I'll typically put the cover on and protect it with that. If we're doing dinner with guests and stuff, I'll leave the teak out. It's beautiful. This is mineral filled polyester Duratec material. There's 3 or 4 coats of that on it, and it's really a tough finish. But, you know, my boats, I've been using that for about 15 years, and it's a wonderful coating. But you know, take good care of it and it'll last a long time for you. The other thing that people miss is there's another big storage area right here that huge.
Wow.
It's like 6 feet long here. And the pies are...
That's for the dead bodies, just kidding.
And the pies here let us, you know, get access for service in the future. Nice stainless steel springs. The aluminum is just a gutter to keep the water from getting in. These little pieces here, these stretcher poles, go in to the sockets on the canvas here, and they basically let you tension it so that you don't have any low spots that are going to catch water, which is really nice. The plexiglass windscreen here, again, when the boat is all wet, it's fine to scrub that with a soft bristle brush. Don't use the deck brush that's real stiff or you'll scratch it. And then again, that Meguiar's plexiglass cleaner will work great. So, good. What else do I want to show you?
You say there was a access point to the air conditioning here.
Oh yeah, that's it. So, you know, there's a 14,000 BTU air conditioner under here too that drops in cool air to the salon. And I hate things that aren't serviceable, so we've actually created a fiberglass panel here with just 6 screws, and you can take this off, and then this piece here is also removable, and it lets you have just wonderful access to that to service it. The other service panel, Amanda, is underneath the footrest here, and again, 4 screws, and you've got beautiful access to that area and the wiring that's underneath the dash. That's kind of fun. These helm seats are Bentleys, dual density foam. They're about $1,200 a piece. They're really comfortable bucket seats. And this design with this layout lets you have 2 helm seats up here and a big long lounge. And some people like that, and some people like to have this a little shorter with a little bit farther, bigger back deck. This is canvas that goes over the seats here to protect them. The material we use here is all Sunbrella. We don't use any of the acrylic stuff that's from China that or Asia that really you can buy stuff that looks like this, feels like this, and literally in 12 or 15 months has started to change colors, and it's pilling already. You know, isn't that the word pilling?
Pilling.
Yeah, very quickly. So we try to avoid that. Let's see. Even the foam in our upholstery is made in the U.S. and it's if you look at a 5 or 7 year old Aspen, the foam still is tight and square, and if you look at the lower cost ones boats, you'll see that the foam has started to roll over because it's basically the little foam cells are breaking. The seats swivel, they go up and down, all kinds of fun stuff. And here at the dash, a few things to kind of be aware of. The first thing is most people miss the idea that the helm is tiltable. You push a little trigger underneath, you can get it up and out of your way. The other thing to know about the helm is that this is the highest point in the hydraulic steering system. So whether it's the lower helm or the autopilot pump or anything like that, as you use the system, the air bubbles will come up to the top here, and this will be the one that kind of feels funny. They'll basically have slop in it if it's got air in it. And to top it off here, there's a little plastic cap here that comes off, that this sort of wiggles out, and then right here is a cap, and this cap is the one that has a little tiny hole in it. The one that's down at the helm is solid. It doesn't have a cap or a hole. So this is the vent and so forth. If you're going to add fluid, you basically unscrew this, and then there's a thing that fits into it, and you get a little quart of fluid, and you can squeeze it into that. And so good to know if you did have to add fluid. That's where I usually keep a bottle of that fluid on my boat. The other thing to know is that you don't fill this all the way to the brim. I use a Q-tip to see where it's at in there, and you want to leave, you know, a ½ inch of air or so at the top, so that if the fluid expands and contracts with temperature, it's moving with air. If you fill it all the way to the top, what it'll do is it will ooze out fluid out the top, and it just sort of makes a mess, and it's slippery on the floor. So all these little covers pop off here. And when I'm not using the flybridge, I tend to turn everything off, and I put the covers back on. If you leave the cover off and you get into a big rainstorm, you get a bunch of rain running down this, the screen can sense that, and sometimes the computers will do stupid things if you've got water running down the upper screen. So just sort of a heads up on that. You've got your windlass control here, so you can easily anchor from up here. Your trim tabs are here. This is a stereo right here, upper flybridge stereo. Thrusters here. This is a automatic shutoff for the engine, and so there's basically on and off button here. I think it's just off. I think you can do on and off here actually with this. It's just a little bit of information on the Volvo. You have all the rest of the information in the Volvo display here. This is the electronic throttle, and you know, you basically have two throttles, and for you to switch from the upper station to the lower or lower to upper, both of them have to be in the neutral position. You see where it says N? Mm-hmm. And it lights up N when it's in neutral. And if it's lit up N here and it's lit up N down below, then when you push this station button, it will switch to come up here, and this will light up here. Mm-hmm. The gauges will light up. So, and this will come on too. If you get all the way up here and the one down below is still slightly not in neutral,
You won't be able to take
you
control.
won't be able to take control here. Mm-hmm. And we had one customer who was running around doing this, and they got mixed up, and they were in the marina when they decided to switch, and they went, oh shoot, it's in gear idling, and they were in the wrong station while it was driving forward on their own. So a very exciting day.
Yes,
so
very exciting.
you should see how fast they could move.
Yeah, exactly.
So they got it fixed, but it worked out fine. These controls are about $3,000, and they'll last a long time. But when you're not using the boat, good thing to keep dry and keep out of the weather, and things like that. So they're really the only two buttons you really use with this. It has a bunch of extra buttons for other things, but basically it's station control, and throttle only lets you go to fast idle without putting in gear. There is a cruise control function, which is kind of, you can read about it, but it basically lets you get to a particular RPM close to, say, you set it at 2800, and when you get close to 2800, it'll give you 2800. It's not really cruise control like you think of in a car. Let's see, dual density ventilation seats, we talked about that. Putting the tonneau cover on, the hardest part about putting the tonneau cover on is finding the front center. Once you find the front center, everything works out, and my guys are supposed to write on it front and back or aft, and so you can at least hunt from this inside. Once you get that in the right spot, then everything will start lining up, and it goes on pretty nicely. I think that's it for up here.
That's good to know.